The next thing I've got on this chain is the SSL 400E strip. Now, this looks quite confusing, and I know a lot of people, when I talk about this, they kind of shut off because it looks so confusing. But let me just break it down for you. So, this channel strip is essentially like this. It's a physical channel strip modeled off a SSL channel. Now, all it is a channel strip like this. So say for instance, on a massive mixing desk, you'll have all these channels like here, like your virtual mixing desk. Now, this is just one of these. So essentially, it's to say this channel, and these functions on it are essentially just plugins you could put in if you look at it like that. So the first one we have in is a liner mic. That's just a gain tool. The next is dynamics. So that's like having a compressor on this channel. The next is, yeah, that's dynamics as well. The next is a filter. So that's essentially like having a filter on your channel. So you're either removing the highs or the low end information. And then we have an EQ. So quite simply, if you split it up into the different sections, it's very easy to use. The SSL brand for pro audio is probably one of the best known companies in the world, and a lot of records have been mixed through SSL desks. So by using the SSL channel strip, you're kind of getting that console sound, and you're getting a sound that you can trust and rely on. So again, I like to pull this out on the special instruments in my tracks. For instance, a piano, a synth, a vocal. I wouldn't put it on everything, but you could if you wanted to. If you wanted to literally hear how your track would sound like going through an SSL desk, that's definitely something that you could do. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm using a bit of the mic pre. So by turning that up, I'm adding the transformers to the track. So I'm adding a little bit of low end saturation and harmonics to my piano bus. But really what I'm doing is just EQ here. So let me just turn this on and off and you can hear what this does. Off. So if you had a listen to this, you might say, wow, that's really cleaning up the low end and making the highs and the mids feels nicer. And that's exactly what it's doing. I'm not doing any compression. As I said, I'm using a bit of the mic to hear what the transformer sounds like, because it's a very musical sounding transformer. Then all I'm doing is at 7K, around the 7K mark, I'm doing a boost. So if I just show you on a normal EQ, because this is what we used to. So for instance, 7K, I'm doing a boost, maybe like that. The curve's probably a bit smaller. 7K, I'm doing a boost. And at about 200 Hertz, I'm doing a cut. So that's essentially all I'm doing. But because it's done on the SSL channel strip, you're getting the curves that they have modeled from the desk, and it just sounds a lot more musical than using one of these kind of Logic surgical EQs. I highly recommend getting into these a bit, because one, this is the way that records were made in the past, and even though the digital stuff has come such a long way, there is something to be said about just using the knobs and kind of not looking, you're not like, we're so used to looking on the spectrum, where is the sound, more using your knobs, even using the knob, closing your eyes, and just feeling what sounds right. That's what I did with this. I'm not really looking at the frequencies. I'm just searching through it, and I'm thinking, this sounds nice, this doesn't. And it's more of a natural and musical sounding EQ. Something definitely to look into. You can hear how good this sounds on the piano. I'll play it once again. Really bringing that piano to life now. It feels like we're getting a lot closer. Okay, so there's a couple more plugins I've got in here. So this C2, now this is a FabFilter compressor. Essentially, this is just a compressor. The C2 is very good because it's a very neutral sounding compressor, meaning it doesn't add any color to it. Unlike, for instance, the Pultec EQ or the SSL channel strip, these things that you load in, they automatically add a sound to it. This is a very neutral sounding EQ, so it won't add anything to it. So what I've got in here is a preset called Invisible Sustain, and what that does is pulling out the sustain even longer. So let's just hear what it's doing. Turn it off. Really bringing that piano in your face now, and it's starting to feel like more a live performance and not a MIDI performance, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to get it sound more live and sit in the mix nicer. Very simply, all we're doing on this, it's got a fast release and a fast attack, meaning because we're playing the piano fast, we want the compressor to react quickly. So by having a fast release, every time we're hitting the notes, the compressor's resetting and be able to catch in the next note. And that's why it's sounding like this, because it's reacting so fast that every note is being caught and then compressed and then pulled up in sound, so it feels like you're elongating each kind of note we're playing. Exactly what we want when using fast percussive instruments, so like a piano, a guitar, anything like that, a harp that has quick movement. Let's just hear this in the mix now, and I'll just turn just that off. See how that really pulls it to the front of the mix, and it feels like we're actually getting close now. It's feeling a lot less amateur and a lot more professional. All right, we've got one more plug-in. I'm going to take that last one off because that was just to show you guys the EQ curves. Okay, so now the last thing we've got in this is an EQ, and it's a FabFilter Pro Q3. Now what we're doing in this is not your traditional EQ. We're removing the side information, and I'm sure you guys have heard of mid-side mono stereo. Essentially what we're doing in this is removing the side information of this sound. Now, without going too much into mid-side because it is quite a subject, essentially if you think about mid-side, mid is the kind of the majority of where your sound lies. It's where the body is, and the side information is kind of your reverbs, your delays, your kind of stereo imaging. So it's information that is important, but it's not as much, it's not so important as the mid. You know, your mid is the real meat and bones of your sound, and this is your kind of icing on top. So essentially with side information, you don't generally want to have too much low-end side information, so you can be quite drastic in how much you remove. Now if I solo what I'm listening to, and it's this here, this is what I'm removing, and if you hear this, it just sounds very muddy, and I can afford to take this much side information out. If I was doing this in stereo, I'd be cutting too much of the piano out. So you hear that? That's so much more low end in that. And if I listen to the piano now on its own, it's completely taking the body of the sound out. But if I listen to it inside now, what you'll actually find is I'm cleaning up. So what it's doing, it's leaving the kind of mid-range, the mid information of the low end, and all it's doing is taking the side information of the low end, and that really cleans it up. It's very subtle, but just listen. I'm going to turn it on and off, and you'll hear it just clean up. So we're still retaining all that low end information, but we're just cleaning it up now. And essentially, we are trying to make room for the low end, the real low end, which is the bass. So we've got enough low end information in that. And the reason why I'm moving the side up to there is because we just don't need this. It's just going to clutter our mix. So by me just removing the side up to there is just creating enough space for the low end in this track. Then I'm just removing a bit of harsh frequency. Take that kick off. Just a bit of the harsh frequencies here. And that's it. So let's have a listen to it now in the mix. Cool, sounding close. Now there's a few more processes to get to the place. That's kind of the first part of this. As you can hear, even by doing that, we're still not 100% there. So let's get into the next part of this. Okay, so the next thing I've done is parallel processing. So I'm sure you guys have heard of parallel processing and parallel compression. Some people call it New York compression. Essentially what it is, it's getting your signal. So for instance, this piano and making a super compressed version of it and then mix it into your mix. So essentially you're not mixing in the same version, you're adding this super compressed version, so you're getting a really super compressed sound without actually having to compress your sound. It's a very, very cool technique. I use it a lot when for in positions like this, when I want to just get this instrument more in your face. I use it on drums. If the clap's a bit lost, I'll use parallel compression on it. Even on the kick, I'll use parallel compression. It's a very, very useful tool, and I'll show you how I've done this. So what I've done, if you can see the audio file here, I've bounced this bus out. So I just soloed the bus here of these two pianos, the Giant and the Low, and bounced it out, and this is the audio file here. So what I have done, I have put an EQ on this channel. Now all I'm doing is I'm boosting the 8K a lot. So I'm really pulling out the high-end information on this. I'm really pushing that hard. Then I'm going into an 1176. This is again another very famous compressor. Probably there's maybe 3 compressors that are the most famous in the world, and this is probably one of them. It's used on vocals a lot, but it's also really great on parallel processing. It's got a ratio of 20:1, which is virtually like limiting. So what I've done, I've pushed this really, really hard into this limiter. You're going to see it's going to be squashing it so much. And let's just hear what I'm doing. Sorry, that was playing the piano bus as well. There you go. As you can hear, it's just squashing it completely. So we're getting a super squash sound. And this is exactly what you want. You might think, why do we want this super squash sound? And I'll show you. So now we've got that sound, I'll pull it right down in the mix, and I'll start to mix it in, and you'll start to hear what this is doing. It really puts the piano in your face. Right, mute this. And that super compressed layer is just really helping it get to where we want it to be. Very, very cool tool to use. We'll be using it later with vocals. And actually, I'm doing a bit of piano parallel again after this in this next portion. So I'll show you then. Okay, cool. So that is essentially where the piano is. Now, because I've got so many plugins used on this, now what I've done is I've just bounced this whole piano bus as one. So the Giant, the Low, and the parallel as one. Okay, and I end up with this. I'm just going to take this processing off now. I end up with this. And as I said earlier, I do stuff like this because as the plugins build up, it's just stressing my computer out, and I'm just freeing up some processing. So, you know, my tracks turn out to be 50, 60, 70 tracks long sometimes. So I'm just freeing up processing. So as I'm building, I'm not getting lagging, nothing's struggling. And it's also giving this a bit more of a fresher perspective when you're treating one stem rather than 3. So that's what I've done. I've bounced these 3 into one. So let's talk about the processing on this to get it to sit in the mix. So I've got the Oxford Evolution. I'm just adding some sustains to it. I don't really need to go into this. We spoke about it earlier, but I'll just bypass it so you can hear exactly what it's doing. So I'm really lengthening them notes out. I'm really trying to give this a performance now. Like I say, I'm really just trying to turn this from a MIDI performance to an actual performance and to sit in the mix. The next thing I'm doing, I am removing some more side information. If you hear that, it's just mud, a tiny bit of mid-range information there. And then I'm boosting just to help that sit a bit better. So the next thing we're going to add into this is the Ozone Stereo Imager. I've basically put an Ozone on the track. Now this is a mastering plugin, but it's got a very cool tool in it, an imager. So I've got the equalizer and the maximizer on. They're not actually doing anything. But the imager is where we're going to look at. Now, if you see here, we've got the 3 frequency spectrums like we spoke of earlier. We've got low, medium, mid, and the highs. And essentially what we're doing is we're adding stereo imaging to the high portion of this track. So let me show you what's going on. If I select here, this is the low end information. And I'm just pulling this down, making it go more in mono. If you hear, let's listen to here, this is the high-end information. And what I'm doing is I'm making this portion of the signal go even wider. So this is quite, you know, a difficult concept to grasp, but it's best just to listen. So I'm going to just play the whole track and I'll bypass the plugin and you'll hear what it does. Crazy, right? It's almost like an EQ. It's just, you know, it's becoming a little bit brighter, but it's also just helping the piano sit in the mix. So all this high frequency here from the 2.4K up is turning very stereo, and it's really helping the mix because all the drums are at that, they're hitting at that frequency too. So by getting the top end of the piano to tone to stereo, it's just helping the mix. Everything's starting to feel a bit more 3D and everything's falling in its place for, you know, we really want the drums to be knocking hard, and we want the top end of the piano just to feel like it's wrapping around them. We don't want everything fighting, and that's exactly what we're doing here. Lastly, a little bit of EQ on this, which is just removing some of the low end information, just to help it sit in the mix a little bit more. Okay, so we've got a few sends going on here. One is a UAD Lexicon. Now this is a very famous reverb. You may have seen it in pictures of old school recording studios. One of these would be in the center console, and it is kind of the go-to reverb. I've got a setting on this. It's called Jackknife Lee Rich Piano. I've tweaked it a little bit, and it's just the reverb for the piano, just to help it sit in the mix a bit more. Turn it off. Okay, the next thing I've got is a Soundtoys Echo Boy, quite standard. I've just got it on an 1/8 delay, and I'm removing some of the high-end information for a tiny bit of movement. Now, lastly, I've got another bit of parallel on this. Now, it's the same thought process. I'm just trying to get it to sit in the mix a little bit more. As you can see, I mix it in such a small amount. The same kind of thought process behind it. This time I'm boosting some of the low end information into the compressor, and I've got a different compressor on it now. I'm using a TubeTech, which is a really, really nice compressor. I've actually got a real one of these here. It's tube based. A lot of the hip hop artists won't record with one of these. They're so good for making things sound really warm, but they're also really nice to do parallel compression with. So in the same manner as I did before, I'm over compressing this signal, and that's it. I'm just mixing this little bit in, and you'll hear what it does. It really helps it sit in the mix. Turn it off, turn it on. So another reason why I like to use parallel processing in this way is when I have the level set here of how I want it and I want more volume, I don't want to really touch the volume here because I've got the mix kind of set how I want it. If I were to pull the volume up, it would get too loud. By using parallel parallel compression in this way, I can get the piano to sit in the mix better, but the volume doesn't go up too much. It just thickens it. It's a very interesting tool, and you just have to get your head around how to use it, but there's many applications for it. So yeah, I've showed you two in this because there are two different ways. This is the more traditional way. You use it as a send into a compressor, but it's essentially you can do the same way. You can bounce something out, over compress it, and then mix it in. Either or is the right way. I just wanted to show you both ways. Right, again, all this kind of mixing stuff is covered in my mixing course. I've got covered up and more. So if you feel a bit confused with it, then maybe check it out.